In a shady bar in downtown Frankfurt, Germany, two men sat down to have a friendly conversation. The first was an unassuming German pharmacist by the name of Ulrich. The second was an Iraqi military man named Adnan bin Adnan. These two men were lying to each other. Every single detail about their identities was completely made up. One of these men was a psychopathic Nazi from the Waffen-SS, a high-ranking Israeli officer, an Egyptian spy, and the Mossad's most wanted fugitive. The other man was the kingpin of an Iraqi criminal empire, an expert in smuggling humans and a Mossad spy master sent on a false identity to hunt down the first man. The two men were both extremely smart and extremely ruthless, and now they were engaged in a deadly battle of the wits. This is the story of the Schnaft affair, what might be the most insane episode in all of Israeli history. Buckle up, folks. I hope you're ready. The story begins in the German Empire in 1923 in the city of Königsberg, with the birth of a man named Ulrich Schnaft. Schnaft was born a bastard to a single mother, who proceeded to abandon him on the steps of the Königsberg orphanage. Essentially, you start from the lowest possible place you can. His humble origin would leave him with a lifelong desire to prove himself and rise to the top of any group that he joined. He was eventually taken in by a foster family called the Kleins, but Ulrich's time would come with the rise of the Nazi Party. Ulrich absolutely fell in love with the Nazi ideology. With the Nazis, he saw a way to finally make a name for himself. So when World War II broke out, he volunteered in the Waffen-SS. He fought and was injured on the Eastern Front before he was redeployed to Yugoslavia. Ulrich quickly made a name for himself as a talented military man and rose through the ranks. Toward the end of the war, Ulrich's unit was moved to Italy. Now, the SS of 1944 was not what it once was. High casualty rates had forced the SS to rely on, how do I put this, foreign volunteers? And by the end of the war, the SS was starting to look like a modern college recruitment poster. Now, you'd probably expect Ulrich to keep fighting, despite the worsening situation. But this is where it's important to understand something about Ulrich's weird character. He didn't believe in anything. He just looked at whatever he thought would bring the most success and started following it. So, the moment Ulrich saw the war was a lost cause, he had his unit surrender to the Americans while they were stationed in Italy. As with all SS members, the Americans interrogated Ulrich to try and figure out if he had committed any war crimes. Yet after 2 years of interrogations, the Americans weren't able to find a single war crime that he had committed, so they were forced to let him go. He returned to a Germany that had been almost completely destroyed. Everyone that he had once known was dead. He started renting an apartment in Berlin. As it would turn out, his roommate was a Holocaust survivor. Talk about sitcom potential. Do you think that living with a Holocaust survivor made Ulrich rethink his ideology? Well, it did, just not in the way you expect. Ulrich was at this time dirt poor. He could barely find food to eat. Meanwhile, his Jewish roommate got plenty of aid from American Jewish organizations that supported Holocaust survivors. Now, Ulrich saw as well his roommate was doing and appears to have come to an interesting conclusion. He thought to himself, wow, look at how good my roommate is doing. This clearly means that being a Holocaust survivor is super fun and worth it. Oh, I wish that I was a Holocaust survivor. Yeah, it appears that Ulrich got what I can only describe as an obsession with the Holocaust at this time. You just know this guy's making cringy Facebook posts like, I was born in the wrong generation and wrong ethnicity. I wish I was born as a Polish boy named Zbigniew Szczesniak and I could experience peak Warsaw Ghetto. Is it possible for me to be nostalgic for something that I've never even experienced? Eventually, Ulrich made his decision. He had to become a Jew. Since there was practically no one who knew him anymore, he painstakingly created a brand new identity for himself. Alright, I just added the finishing touches, and your brand new Jewish identity is ready. All we need now is a name. How about Gavriel? Gavriel Weitzman. Seriously, man? You don't want people to find out about your old Nazi identity, and the name you picked for yourself is Weitzman? Weitzman? It literally means white man. Come on, man, just let me have this one. And with that, Ulrich fully embraced his new Jewish identity as Holocaust survivor Gavriel Weitzman, or according to some sources, Zisman. And yeah, it legitimately seems that his only real motivation to become Jewish was to receive the legendary sums of money that he was completely convinced that every Jew had. Immediately, he started receiving aid from Jewish organizations, and his status quickly improved. Eventually, Ulrich heard that many of the local Jews were traveling to the Holy Land to start a new community there. Ulrich by this point had decided there was no future in Germany, and that the future lay with the Jews. So he joined his new Jewish friends on an immigrant ship heading to Palestine. Now at this time, Palestine was ruled by the British Empire. Since British policy was heavily influenced by the opinion of Palestine's Arabs, the British functionally banned Jews from coming to Palestine. Because of this policy, European Jews organized massive illegal immigration campaigns and sent over many immigrant ships. Yet the British didn't plan to just sit back and let that happen. The Royal Navy began intercepting the illegal immigration ships and deporting the passengers to massive prison camps in Cyprus. The camps were overcrowded and life there was purposefully made extremely difficult in order to scare further European Jews from attempting to immigrate. Ulrich's ship was intercepted before it could reach its destination, and he was sent to the camps in Cyprus. So Ulrich, a Nazi officer, found himself imprisoned in a brutal camp designed for Jews. When faced with the terrible conditions, I just imagine he was like,
Oh my God.
After months at the prison camp, Ulrich and the other inmates began to notice that one of the prisoners seemed to have appeared in the camp one day without ever being transferred there. The name of the mysterious stranger was Yoash Sidon, but is more commonly known as Chato. Chato was never imprisoned in the camps by the British. Rather, he had snuck in on his own accord. That was because Chato was a spy. He had been sent on a commando mission by the Haganah, the largest Zionist militia. His mission was to infiltrate the camps in Cyprus, secretly raise an army of inmates, and then, once the army was ready, break them all out of the camp and smuggle them to Palestine, where the Jewish forces desperately needed more manpower. Chato and a few other Jewish commandos who had infiltrated the camps immediately got to work. Very quickly, they noticed an interesting man named Ulrich Schnaft. Ulrich mysteriously already seemed to be an expert at military matters, and in particular, he was excellent at making bombs. Seeing Ulrich's talent, Chato appointed him to be the head of recruitment and training for his new army. Ulrich got to work, and using the skills he had learned in the SS, he achieved some insane successes. Thousands of people were trained and inducted into the new organization, called Shurot HaMeganim, or in English, the Rows of Defenders. Once a group of inmates was trained, Shurot HaMeganim would dig tunnels out of the camp and smuggle them out and then onto ships to Palestine. In addition, members of the group would sneak out using those tunnels and put bombs on nearby British ships, before sneaking back into the prison camps before the British even noticed that anyone had gone missing. Ulrich and Chato upped their efforts, and before long, the camps in Cyprus became a manpower factory for the newly created State of Israel, and the reinforcements sent by the group would prove pivotal in the Israeli War of Independence, which was happening at this time. Ulrich himself tried to escape the camps on 2 different occasions, but neither attempt was successful. In 1949, once the State of Israel was established and the war had fully ended, the British abolished the Cyprus camps and allowed all the inmates to immigrate to Israel. Ulrich settled down in a small Israeli town called Kiryat Anavim, learned Hebrew, and took up a career in farming. Ulrich wanted to settle down and live out his life on his farm. The newly created Israeli army wasn't going to let Schnaft settle down that easily. The IDF needed talent for its ranks, and they remembered a talented man from the camps in Cyprus, so it was only so long before a group of soldiers showed up at Ulrich's farm, attempting to recruit him.
You're a hard man to find, Galen. But farming. Really? Man of your talents? It's a peaceful life.
Ulrich was offered a sweet deal. He would join the IDF and go straight to a prestigious officer's course. Ulrich accepted, passing the course with flying honors and joining the Israeli Artillery Corps. He quickly reached the rank of lieutenant and was considered one of the IDF's most promising officers. Ulrich's new goal in life became to rise through the ranks and become the chief of the Israeli army. But that would all change on one fateful night. Now, time and time again in this story, you're going to see that Ulrich has 2 weaknesses: alcohol and women. And the first of the 2 was about to take center stage. Ulrich went out drinking one night with a group of friends from the army. They got completely drunk, and before long, Ulrich was pissing on the floor, texting his ex, telling everyone in the bar that he was a Nazi. Wait, what? Yeah, it turns out Galaxy Brain Ulrich had kept a little picture of himself in an SS uniform and took it almost everywhere. Now completely drunk, he pulled it out, got up on the table, and started ranting about how he had once been a Nazi in the SS and used to kill people like his current friends. The next morning, his army superior summoned him and demanded to know what the actual hell had just happened. Gabriel, would you like to let us know why exactly you were just photographed with a Nazi uniform? It was a Purim costume. A quick pause. Purim, if you don't know, is basically Jewish Halloween, if Halloween had about 8,000% more alcohol and commemorated thwarting an attempted genocide. People wear costumes, get drunk, it's a whole thing. And yes, Ulrich genuinely tried to pass off his Nazi uniform as a Purim costume. Yeah, listen, that year was wild Purim, but, it was a pretty awesome costume, right? Gabriel, you're a Holocaust survivor. You were in the camps. Why the hell would you be dressing up as a Nazi? Look, it's like our way of reclaiming what's been done to us. It's like our N-word, you know? No, Gabriel, what the hell are you talking about? What's wrong with you? Relax, liberal, it's called dark humor. Ulrich was immediately thrown out of the Israeli army. His superiors didn't actually think for a moment that he was truly in the SS. That was outside the realm of possibility. But the costume was a bit too edgy for a senior officer. And just like that, his dreams of becoming chief suddenly ended. To say that he was pissed would be an understatement. He started to despise the State of Israel and went back to his old hatred of Jews from his days in the SS. He would start renting an apartment in the Israeli city of Ashkelon. The landlords were a German-speaking married couple. The wife was a Christian German woman about 20 years older than Ulrich by the name of Margot, and her husband was a German Jewish man who was 20 years older than she was. Yet Ulrich wasn't about to let a few years get in the way of a good time, and he immediately started having an affair with his landlady. After many months, the husband eventually walked in on them. He immediately kicked out Ulrich, but to his surprise, Margot just packed up her stuff and left her husband to go live with her new boyfriend. Now, I'm going to be real with you for a second. If you're a Jewish man and your wife leaves you for a literal Nazi, you need to stop everything you're doing and think about the decisions in your life that led you to this moment, because something is not being done right. Anyway, Ulrich and Margot moved to the Israeli city of Haifa. At this point in life, Ulrich was not having a good time. He was super nostalgic about his old life in Germany. And to top it all off, while Israel might now be known as a developed country, early Israel was kind of a terrible place to live in. Israel had to suddenly receive over 1 million Jews who had come from Arab countries. The massive and sudden immigration waves basically broke the Israeli economy. There simply wasn't enough food for everyone, so the Israeli government was forced to take drastic measures. The government passed extreme emergency food rationing laws. Each person was limited to a very small amount of food each day, barely enough to live on. Yet, many Israelis didn't like those rules and would acquire additional food through the black market. The government took additional measures to prevent Israelis from breaking the rationing laws, the most prominent of which was when they instituted a harsh ban on any movies that depicted meals or feasts. I'm just imagining Israeli prisons must have looked crazy after that. So, what are you in for? I stabbed 16 people to death with a rusty shovel. What about you? I watched The Sopranos. In addition to the food laws, Israel didn't really have any sort of security on its borders. So there was this period where Palestinians would just cross the border, throw grenades into random people's bedrooms while they were sleeping, and then sneak back across the border, and what would become known as the Fedayeen insurgency. Given all that, it's not hard to see why Ulrich wanted to leave Israel. And to make things even worse, Ulrich saw in the news that his homeland of Germany was now experiencing what would come to be known as the economic miracle. And suddenly, life in Germany was awesome again. So Ulrich made up his mind. He and Margot would get the hell out of Israel and go to Germany. Ulrich and Margot took a boat to Italy, and from there they planned to cross the border to Germany. Yet when Ulrich attempted to cross the border, he was denied, since at this point Israel was boycotting Germany. Turns out the whole Holocaust thing was kind of a sticking point, so Israeli passports weren't valid for German border crossings. Well, Margot, this kind of sucks. I suppose we're going to go back to Israel now and live out our life together there? Hell no, I still have my German passport. I'm heading to Germany without you. Bye, have fun, wherever. Did she just leave me? Oh, if only there was some sort of warning sign that this woman wasn't particularly loyal. Anyway, Ulrich had an idea. He went to meet with the German consul in Italy. He told the consul his full life story. He didn't hide anything. Remember, this is 1950s Germany. Everyone knew that one guy who was in the SS. Yet, since Ulrich's hometown of Königsberg had been occupied by the Soviets after the war, there wasn't any way to get the documents from his childhood, and the consul refused to help him get back to Germany since he didn't believe his story. So now, Ulrich was stuck in Italy with $20 in his pocket and no way to cross the border to Germany or go back to Israel. So he did the only thing he could think of. He went to the Egyptian consulate in Italy and told the Egyptians his entire life story. Now you need to understand that at this point, Israel and Egypt were arch enemies and they had already fought 2 wars with each other. Ulrich knew the Egyptians would be desperate for a spy who had been an officer in the Israeli army. So he agreed to do whatever the Egyptians asked as long as they would help him to get to Germany in the end. The Egyptians flew him to Egypt under the false name Robert Hayat. He was given a luxurious residence in Cairo. During the day, he would sit in meetings with Egypt's highest-ranking military officials and tell them everything he knew about the Israeli army's structure and capabilities. And during the night, he would be given free tours of Egypt's biggest tourist attractions and go on Nile cruises that were fully paid for by the Egyptian government. Once Ulrich had told them everything, they asked Ulrich to go back to Israel, redraft in the Israeli army, and become an Egyptian sleeper agent deep in the Israeli security establishment. Ulrich considered the offer, but he told the Egyptians that he had some unfinished business in Germany that he wanted to take care of. If you've been paying attention, I hope you can guess what that business was. Anyway, the Egyptians kept their word and flew him to Germany with a very large payment. In Germany, he was able to reconnect with his old stepmother and get himself a job working at her pharmacy. Now, life seemed to be going pretty well for Ulrich. He could have settled down and the story would have ended here, but there was a problem. Ulrich was still deeply, deeply in love with his ex-girlfriend Margot, and he just couldn't move on without her. So, after tracking her down, he went to her apartment, hoping that he would be able to win her back. Hey, Margot, it's me. I'm back. Oh, didn't you miss me? Ulrich? Didn't I, leave you in Italy or something? Yeah, you kinda did, but now that I'm here, do you want to get back together? No, not really. Alright, Ulrich, the NPC Margot says, not really. What's your move? I roll for seduction. I say something that'll impress her. Alright, just roll for a quick charisma check. Ooh, critical fail. Not good. Hey, Margot, would you, maybe stay with me if I told you something, really cool? Yeah, I bet you're not gonna believe this. Do you know that I was a Nazi? What? Yeah, no, I was in the SS. You're German Christian, right? German Christian girls like that sort of stuff, right? What? No, that disgusts me on every level. Come on, Margot, what is it? Don't tell me you found someone new. Well, not someone new. More like someone old. Someone old? What does that even mean? What the hell are you doing in my house? Ulrich quickly ran out of the house, absolutely shocked at what he had seen. Let me explain. It would turn out that after leaving Ulrich in Italy, Margot had actually gone back to Israel, gotten back together with her old husband that she had cheated on, and eventually the two of them had moved to Germany together. Anyway, Ulrich traveled back to Frankfurt and resumed his job as a pharmacist, trying to forget about Margot. The years went by, and eventually he did seem to move on from her. But Margot didn't move on from him. Margot was deeply disturbed by the fact that she had dated a Nazi. So disturbed that she decided to tell her husband everything. Babe, I have something I need to tell you. Remember that Gabriel guy that I cheated on you with? Well, it turns out his name wasn't even really Gabriel. In fact, he was a Nazi from the SS. Oh my god, I just feel so terrible about the whole thing. Oh my god, he was a Nazi? Well, that's amazing. Huh? Wait, why are you happy that he was a Nazi? It just gave me an idea. Nothing that needs to concern you. The husband realized that he had completely lucked out. For all these years, he had been searching for a way to get revenge on the man who had stolen his wife. And now, he realized that he wouldn't even need to do it himself. The Mossad would do it for him. See, at this time, one of the main campaigns of Israeli intelligence was to hunt down ex-Nazis around the world. And now, the husband realized that he might be able to get Ulrich taken out once and for all. He wasted no time and immediately made contact with the Mossad in Israel. Hello there, this is the Mossad. What is it that you want to tell us about? Hey, listen, I found this Nazi. He escaped justice and joined the Israeli army. And now he's living as a free man in Germany. I think he could use a little bit of being killed to death, brutally, don't you think? We have our hands a little full right now. Was this guy high-ranking? Did he commit any known war crimes? Look, I think he's basically Hitler or something, alright? He's guilty of genocide, war crimes, and first-degree cuckery. Can you guys please just kill him, preferably in an extremely painful way? Mossad wasn't completely sure what should be done with Ulrich. The prevailing opinion was that Ulrich wasn't high-ranking enough to warrant a risky assassination mission in Germany. Most of the Mossad guys just didn't think it was worth it. But one man thought differently. Now, let me explain something. Israel has two main intelligence agencies. The Mossad, which deals with foreign intelligence, and the Shabak, also known as the Shin Bet, also known as the GSS, also known as the ISA, which deals with internal security. Yeah, I don't know why those guys have so many names. The agencies are supposed to be completely separate, but at this time they were both run by one man, Issar Harel, better known as Little Issar. Yup, that's the guy from my last video. Okay, well, actually the Shabak was run by this guy Amos Menor, but everyone knew who was really in charge. Anyway, Harel especially despised Nazis and wanted justice to be done to Ulrich. And since Harel's opinion was the only one that actually mattered, an assassination team was quickly dispatched to Germany. The assassins started tailing Ulrich, and the killing was ready to be carried out. But Harel had a change of heart at the last moment. He decided that he didn't want Ulrich to die mysteriously in some German back alley. He wanted Schnaft to be brought to Israel and face justice for his crimes. Yet, now the plan got about 100% more complicated because the new plan required someone to go to Germany and befriend Schnaft. So Harel picked his right-hand man to lead the mission, who was also the only person who may have had more false identities than Schnaft did. Now, if I were to ask you who was the greatest known Israeli spy of all time, many of you would probably say Eli Cohen, for understandable reasons. But I would like to nominate someone else. This was a guy who was basically Israel's James Bond, and his life legitimately sounds like fiction. This was a guy who smuggled thousands of people between countries using passenger planes. A guy who did secret missions in Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, France, and Germany. A man who befriended the architect of the Holocaust under a false identity. A man who walked into Lebanon's intelligence headquarters, told the intelligence chief that he was a Mossad agent, and somehow walked out with his life. So, I want to briefly pause Ulrich's story and take a moment to talk about his nemesis, Shmuel Moriah. Yeah, I wasn't expecting him to look like that either. Shmuel Moriah, more commonly known by his nickname Sammy, was born to a poor Jewish family in the Iraqi city of Basra. His father died when he was only 6, and despite being just a small child, Sammy took it upon himself to provide for his family. Every night, Sammy would tell his mother that he was going to hang out at his best friend's house, when in reality he would walk out into the dark and dangerous streets and brothels of Basra and sell pencils, shaving knives, and other thingamabobs out of a big box that he brought with him. In particular, Sammy found a second home in the brothels of Basra. The prostitutes grew to know him as that one cute boy who'd walk in every night and try selling people pencils. They sort of took him in and gave him important advice for surviving on the streets. In his autobiography, Sammy recounts how one time while he was selling at the brothel, some creepy clown came up to him and started feeling him up. Without thinking twice, Sammy slammed his box of pens into the person's head, causing him to fall onto the floor and start bleeding. He recounts how the prostitutes, furious that someone would even touch Sammy, lynched the man. Lynched him. And Sammy just walked out of the room and went home. Yeah, he didn't mess around, and he was like, what, 10? Anyway, eventually Sammy decided to tell his mom the truth. Mom, there's something that I need to tell you, something that I've been hiding from you from a long time. Does it have to do with why every night you go to your best friend's house and stay there until it's super late? Yeah, Mom, you see, the truth is, I was never going to his house. I was running a business in the back of a brothel. I'm so sorry, Thank God, I thought you were gay. Eventually, Sammy became a teenager, and he quickly realized that he had a real talent for tricking people. He started dabbling in illegal smuggling, mostly expensive fabrics, between Iraq and Iran. Turns out, he was really, really good at it. Before long, local smugglers stopped competing with him and started working for him. Teenage Sammy was now running one of the biggest smuggling operations in the Middle East, complete with a network of informants and a fleet of boats. Try as they might, the Iranian and Iraqi authorities were unable to stop the illegal flow of fabric between Iraq and Iran. Sammy's adventures were briefly interrupted when he was forcefully drafted into the Iraqi army, but he was able to escape with the help of a sympathetic Iraqi general, and for good measure, he even managed to get the officer who had drafted him thrown in jail. By now, his smuggling talents had been picked up by the Zionist underground. In case you didn't know, the Iraqi Zionist underground was a massive secret Zionist group in Iraq, and they wanted Sammy's talents. Hey Sammy, we saw your smuggling talents and we want to offer you a job. Smuggling something a little different. People. Whoa, man, I don't do that. I'm in the fabric business. Listen, don't get me involved in this. No, I meant like good people smuggling, like people who want to be smuggled. Think Harriet Tubman. Okay. You really should have led with that last part. Through the Zionist underground, Sammy got in contact with the Institute of Illegal Immigration, a group in British-ruled Palestine that illegally smuggled Jews to the Holy Land, despite the harsh British immigration policies. It was the same group that had sent Yoash down to Cyprus, where he would later meet Ulrich Schnaft. Remember Ulrich Schnaft? Yeah, don't worry, we're going to get back to him in just a bit. Anyway, Sammy orchestrated some absolutely insane illegal immigration operations, which involved everything from brothels to Bedouin caravans. As much as I'd love to talk about all of them, we really don't have time for that, so I'll just touch on one of the most insane ones. Operation Michaelberg. In Operation Michaelberg, Sammy was able to secretly sneak Jews into the Iraqi airport and then just straight up illegally fly them to Israel on a massive cargo plane that he had arranged to be brought to the airport. Many of the people who were brought to Israel on that plane would later become influential Israeli politicians. Oh, and by the way, can we talk about how lame of a name Operation Michaelberg is? You're telling me that guys who thought of names like Operation Isotope, Operation Red Wedding, and Operation Death to the Invader couldn't think of anything better than Michaelberg? Seriously? After the State of Israel was founded, Sammy moved there. Little Isser quickly recruited him to Israel's internal security service, the Shabak, and sent him on some insane missions to places like Lebanon, Syria, and Iran, which sadly I don't have time to cover now. Sammy said in his autobiography that at this time he was the only high-ranking member of the Shabak to come from an Arab country, with all the other high-ranking members being Ashkenazi Jews from European countries. Yet despite this, Little Isser arguably trusted him more than anyone else in the agency. It was at this point that Sammy truly perfected his skills at creating false identities. After Israel captured Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, Sammy went to his cell, pretending to be a non-Jewish prison guard who was sympathetic to Eichmann. He would bring Eichmann extra food and chat with him. Eichmann fully fell for the act, and in their chats, he let it slip that his right-hand man was living free in London. Sammy was immediately dispatched on a mission to London to capture the man, but the mission failed and he evaded capture. But while hunting down Nazis might have been morally easy, Little Isser would soon appoint Sammy to a much more morally questionable job. You see, as I mentioned earlier, at this time Israel didn't really have secure borders, and the Israeli security establishment assumed that the next time a war broke out with Israel's Arab neighbors, some Israeli territories would probably be conquered. So, Little Isser came up with an absolutely ingenious plan. Isser tasked Sammy with creating a massive group of Jews who, over the years, would learn to impersonate Arabs perfectly. They would learn the Palestinian dialect and take advanced classes in Islam. Once their long training was done, they would be dispersed in Israeli Arab towns. They would live there for years on end, completely cut off from their previous lives. They would marry Arab women and raise their children as Arabs, fully embracing their new identity. They would become known as the Musta'ribin, those who became Arabs. According to the plan, the Mustaribin would create spy rings in their communities. Then, if those areas were conquered by neighboring Arab states, Israel would have pre-built spy rings ready inside of those countries. Sammy got to work in creating the team. The entire project was kept so secret that aside from Isser, no one in the Shabak who wasn't directly involved knew about it. Sammy basically had free reign to create history's first, and potentially only, army of sleeper agents. He trained them meticulously. At least one agent even underwent plastic surgery to better blend in. And it worked. The Mustaribin infiltrated deep into their communities, earning trust and gathering valuable intelligence. But eventually, it became clear that Israel's Arab neighbors weren't going to conquer any Israeli territory. The entire project had honestly outlived its purpose. The Mustaribin were recalled and reintegrated. Or, at least that was the goal. Sammy spent years of his life afterwards helping the ex-Mustaribin readjust to life in Israel. He said that he felt he owed it to them. Many had lost their families and their sense of self. And then there were the Arab families, the wives and children that they had left behind. Some of the wives chose to convert to Judaism and move to Israel, and Sammy personally helped them start new lives over there. But many of the families were torn apart in the process, and many of the women never recovered from the betrayal of finding out their husband was secretly working against them. Looking back, Sami would say in his autobiography that the Mustaribin project was his life's biggest regret. It had destroyed lives, and in the end, it hadn't even really been necessary. Anyway, with all that backstory out of the way, I hope it's clear why Isser chose Sami to be the agent who would go to Germany and somehow kidnap Ulrich Schnaft, the Nazi who was living out his life peacefully there. Isser even gave Sami the honor of naming the joint Mossad-Shabak operation to bring Ulrich back to Israel. Alright, Sami, you get to be the one to name this operation. But just please promise not to give it some lame name. I still remember how last time you named an operation, we ended up with Operation Michaelberg. Can you, not do that? Oh, look, I'm sure I'll think of a really cool name. Do you promise? Of course I promise. Anyway, the name I've chosen for the operation is Operation Enema. Seriously, man? Sami went to Germany and eventually met with Ulrich through a shared acquaintance who was secretly a Mossad agent. Sami introduced himself as an Arab man named Adnan bin Adnan and asked Ulrich if he would be interested in grabbing lunch at an expensive local restaurant. Ulrich agreed. There, they really got to know each other. At the end of it, Sami got up to pay for the meal. As he was reaching into his wallet, he accidentally dropped the picture onto the floor. Ulrich picked it up and couldn't believe his eyes. Ulrich looked at the photo and saw Adnan in full Iraqi military uniform. Now, the fake photo had been painstakingly created by the Mossad. A lot of effort was put into making it look convincing. Remember, Photoshop and AI didn't exist at this time. When Ulrich asked Sami about the photo, Sami admitted that he was the Iraqi military attaché in Paris and that he was on visit to Germany. Ulrich, sensing an opportunity, quickly started telling Sami his full life story, starting with his time in the SS and then his Israeli military service, and finally finishing with how he had spied for Egypt. Sami pretended to be extremely impressed. Sami asked Ulrich if he could come to his house. Ulrich brought him, and at the house, Sami officially gave Ulrich an offer. He told him that there were rumors that a massive oil reserve had been discovered near the Israeli city of Ashkelon, where Ulrich had once lived. He said that Iraq, a major oil exporter, was concerned about these reports and wanted to know if they were true. So he asked Ulrich to go back to Israel and figure out if these rumors were true in return for a huge sum of money. Ulrich accepted. And so, in one genius move, Sami had single-handedly convinced Ulrich to voluntarily go back to Israel, without even needing to kidnap him. Now, when I first heard the story, one thing that I didn't understand was why Ulrich took the offer when he had previously denied the Egyptian offer to essentially do the same thing. While I don't have a definitive answer, my guess would be that when the Egyptians offered it to him, he still felt that he had a chance of going back to Germany and getting back together with Margot. But by this point, all of his hopes of living out his life with Margot were gone, and he didn't really have anything left to lose. Anyway, there was one more problem left for Sami. Ulrich's flight to Israel was in 2 months, and Sami was worried that during the waiting period, Ulrich might chicken out and change his mind. He didn't feel comfortable leaving Ulrich alone with his thoughts, so he came up with an idea. He offered Ulrich to come on a trip with him to Paris for weeks of non-stop partying, drinking, and general debauchery. They got to Paris around Christmas time. Sami spent a ridiculous amount of Mossad money on fancy restaurants in the area. By the way, the picture you're seeing here is real, and it's the only known picture of Ulrich and Sami together. Sami also made sure to keep a steady flow of alcohol going into Ulrich's mouth, in order to keep him dull and make sure he didn't start to doubt his new Iraqi friend. But at one point, his cover was almost blown. While Ulrich and Sami were dining in a luxurious Persian restaurant, an Israeli couple that Sami knew happened to walk in. Sami was worried that they would say hi to him in Hebrew and blow his cover, but they seemed to understand that he didn't want to be spoken to and ignored him. On Christmas, Sami promised Ulrich that he would bring him to the famous strip club Lilido as a grand finale to their trip. Yet, when Sami contacted the Mossad and asked for money for 2 tickets, the Mossad told him that they had had enough of his reckless spending in Paris and said they refused to pay the money for the tickets, even though the mission depended on it, and because the Mossad was trying to save up money or something. Yeah, they weren't beating the stereotypes with that one. Eventually, Sami reached a deal where the Mossad agreed to pay for 1 ticket. He gave it to Ulrich and told him that he would wait outside. But once the show had finished, Ulrich was nowhere to be found. Sami started to legitimately freak out a bit that Ulrich had noped out the mission at the last moment. To calm his nerves, he took a late-night walk around Paris. When he got back to Lilido, Ulrich was waiting for him, thankfully. When Sami found him, he saw that Ulrich was crying. Ulrich told Sami that he had never felt so alone on Christmas Eve before. To cheer him up, Sami took him to yet another bar. After just a few drinks, Ulrich started laughing and telling ridiculously anti-Semitic jokes, which was a sign that he was happy. Eventually, it was time for them to part ways. But before they did, Ulrich had one more request left for Sami. He asked Sami to give him a gun to take to Israel. That way, even if he got caught, he would be able to take as many Jews down with him as possible. He seemed very enthusiastic about the prospect of committing a terror attack if Plan A didn't work, so Sami had to convince him that a gun would never get past Israeli airport security. Sammy thought that he had boarded the danger, but to his surprise, Ulrich then took out a ballpoint pen from his pocket. Ulrich smiled and said that he didn't need a gun anyway because this pen could shoot deadly toxic gas. With that, Ulrich smiled and walked out of the bar. Sammy started freaking out since he had no idea what was the deal with Ulrich's weird gas pen. He quickly contacted the Mossad and told the agents that were waiting for Ulrich to watch out for the pen. On the plane, Ulrich went into a spending spree, buying so much on-flight alcohol and getting completely drunk. Once the plane had landed, he hobbled out of Ben Gurion Airport and got into a taxi that was waiting for him there. Once the taxi had started driving, he felt a gun press against the back of his head and he heard a voice behind him say, "What should we call you, Gabriel or Ulrich?" It was at that moment he realized that it was over. Ulrich was tied up and thrown in the back of the car. It was said that he cried uncontrollably and threw up on the way to the interrogation facility. Eventually, Ulrich was tried on a non-public trial. Weirdly enough, the only crime that he was put on trial for was spying for Egypt, not the Nazi stuff or his recent attempt to spy for Iraq. In the end, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for treason. Now, I know what you're wondering. What about the poison pen that Ulrich had? What's the deal with that thing? And the answer is, nobody has any idea. It was just a normal pen. My guess would be that Ulrich made a joke that Sammy took seriously. But even Sammy said in his autobiography that he had no idea why Ulrich made up a lie about his pen. To be fair, a Nazi spy with a poison gas-themed weapon seems very on the nose. In prison, Ulrich was a model prisoner and spent most of his time reading the Bible. When one of his inmates, a Frenchman, was released and sent back to France, Ulrich asked him to go to the Iraqi embassy and ask for a man by the name of Adnan bin Adnan. See, even after everything that had happened, the arrest, the interrogation, the trial, Ulrich still didn't get it. He actually had no idea that Adnan bin Adnan was a made-up identity and that the whole thing had been a Mossad operation from the start. He genuinely thought that his old friend Adnan would be waiting for him, ready to pay him for all the suffering he'd endured on his behalf. Yeah, he'd be very disappointed. Anyway, after serving only 5 years of his sentence, Ulrich was released and sent to Germany, on the condition that he'd never come back to Israel. And by the way, can we please acknowledge the fact that a Nazi SS officer who pretended to be a Holocaust survivor for financial gain and spied against Israel only got 5 years in the Israeli prison system? Did he have like Saul Goodman as his lawyer or something? What the hell? Ulrich returned to Germany and seems to have disappeared. His cellmate and friend, Zev Eckstein, later wrote in his autobiography that Ulrich became a Lutheran priest in Germany. Who was Zev Eckstein? Oh, just the man who committed the second biggest political murder in Israeli history, but I don't have time to get into that now. Anyway, after a bit of research on my end, I found out that Eckstein's story has zero basis in reality. It seems he just completely made it up. So, what did happen to Ulrich? Many German journalists attempted to track him down to no avail. Even Sammy said in his autobiography that he didn't really know what happened to Ulrich in the end. On Wikipedia, it simply says that he disappeared. His fate remained unknown. Until now. Yup, that's right, guys. After a ridiculous amount of research, I managed to talk to someone who was in contact with Ulrich's family in Germany. And I've managed, for the first time in internet history, to discover Ulrich's final fate. And honestly, it might be the most insane part of this entire story. But before we get to that, a quick word from our sponsor, myself. Do you want to go beyond the same boring headlines and actually dive deep into extremely obscure Middle Eastern lore? Well, you're in luck, because on this channel I plan to go all the way down the iceberg and talk about things like the Japanese emperor's Jewish brother, and that time 2 million Palestinians almost joined the IDF. This video is nothing compared to some of the projects that I'm working on, but I need your help. Due to their content, basically all my videos are demonetized. That's why I created a Patreon, where you can help fund my videos. Patreon is basically the only way I can make money from YouTube, so feel free to go ahead and join the Merchants Guild. Now, back to the video. Alright, you guys ready? You sure? Okay. So it turns out Ulrich went back to his old identity as a Holocaust survivor, got married, and raised a Jewish family who had no idea about his true identity. That's right, he changed teams yet again. That being said, he went by his real name, Ulrich Schnaft, and not by his old Jewish alias of Gabriel Weitzman. He became a pro-Israel figure and raised money for pro-Israel causes. Despite being warned to never return to Israel, he actually went back there twice. Once as a tourist, and once on a trip with his 12-year-old daughter where he visited the Western Wall. So all that begs the question, why? Why would someone who by all accounts despised Jews decide to live out his life as a Holocaust survivor? Especially since he no longer had anything to gain from it. And the answer is, I really have no idea. But I'll give my personal theory. I think that his decision might have actually stemmed from his desire to provoke the Israeli security establishment. The Israelis were disgusted by what he had done, so he just had to raise a Jewish family and come to Israel to show them. Maybe that was his strange and petty way of getting revenge. But like I said, that's just a theory, and his motives remain unknown. Later in life, Ulrich became absolutely obsessed with Kabbalah, a type of Jewish mysticism, and he wrote many articles on Kabbalah in small German newspapers. You know, with the absolutely schizo beliefs that this guy had, I think it's one of history's great tragedies that he never had access to modern Twitter. I think he would have done numbers there. While Wikipedia and many other sources list his fate as unknown, I was able to confirm that Ulrich Schnaft died in 2013. At the time of this research, his family still claims that he was a Holocaust survivor and that the whole Nazi story is fake. Honestly, this whole thing is just so sad and messed up to me. Imagine having to find out one day that your Holocaust survivor grandfather was actually an SS officer. Honestly, I wouldn't accept it either. Regarding Sammy, his story didn't end with Ulrich. He would go on to lead an insane life of espionage. Among his many roles, he was appointed to lead the Mossad office in Paris, which was surprisingly similar to Adnan bin Adnan's fake job. If you want to know more about Sammy's life, I highly recommend reading his biography, which was one of my main sources for this video. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. It took way longer than it was supposed to because I got sick in the middle of production and couldn't work on it for a while. Usually I try to end my videos with some sort of moral or takeaway, but Ulrich's story is legitimately so weird that I honestly still don't really know what to make of it. Oh yeah, and to any who are wondering, that's Ulrich's picture behind me. And yes, it's been there in every video since the beginning. Of course, if you learned anything new, don't forget to subscribe. You can contact me at hesmonianhistorian@gmail.com for any questions or video ideas. And of course, please let me know what you thought of the video and any ways that I can improve. And yeah, sources are in the description as usual. Last but not least, thank you to all my patrons, 23 Tova Arm, Braindead, Dan Palamak, Arsen T. Captain, Natalie Bates, Joseph Dizes, Javi Niven, Ol001, Yuval BCD, Shimon Weinbach, Shai Nachum, Bian, Zachary Cohen, Dirty Mug, Shmuel Chazan, Alon Jack, Ryan Chag, Kwandis Chanduk, Rish, Konstantin K, Robert Nichols, Kukushka, and Evan Berry. You are all truly wonderful, and I couldn't have done this without you. And that's it for today.